Okay, we are back to civil rights. This is the next lecture. We are dealing with the PowerPoint presentation that is in the module in Canvas. And so the previous one had to do with some of the civil rights acts going back into the 50s, actually, and along with some introduction. And we'll just pick up and talk about a few more of these. We got about 15 minutes. And let's get going on this, get this moving. Great. So here we are on the Voting Rights Amendments. Things you should look up. Definitely do some reading about. I'm not sure how many of these your book gets into, but we separate them. Instead of just civil rights, the Voting Rights Amendments, dealing with, of course, race, previous condition of servitude, meaning slavery, the 15th Amendment, one of the civil War amendments. I refer to them as the first civil rights amendments. 19th, women get the right to vote. Then we finally eliminated the poll tax, as you remember from the Jim Crow readings, Jim Crow discussions, that the poll tax was used to keep blacks and actually anybody poor whites even from voting. We eliminated that. You should not have to pay something to exercise this right as a citizen. And of course, dealing with age, 18 years or older, you get to vote. Younger than that, we do discriminate. So women, let's talk about women. Who was the first woman to run for president and who ran in a major party, okay? Secretaries of State, Speaker of the House, and of course in the Supreme Court. Now, Victoria Woodhull, the first woman to run for president back in 1872 with the Equal Rights Party. She was a Wall Street tycoon. And very much a proponent of women not just sitting back. I mean, she would say that women had the rights, they just had to exercise them. And she wanted women to be very forceful, and she was. Now, Shirley Chisholm, 68, the first black woman elected to the U.S. Congress, ran for president as a Democrat in 1972, did not win the nomination, and asked then to be the vice presidential candidate. We've talked about that, how when we were talking about president, what do people do, or when we're talking about the campaigns, when you're running, a lot of times you may not expect to become the presidential candidate, but you would hope to be the vice presidential candidate or be at some position in the next administration should that candidate win, should the party win. I'm not sure exactly what she was intending when she ran for president, but she did. Then want to get out there and be the vice presidential candidate, promoting not just women's rights, but the rights of blacks back. And this is in 72. So it's on the heels of the 60s civil rights movement. And she was at the forefront of that. Now, Nancy Pelosi. We've talked about Nancy several times. 2002 elected as the first female minority leader of the House. And at this point, you should know what that means. She became the speaker twice, not just once, but twice. In 2006, you can see in 2002, she was minority leader. When the Democrats took control of the House in 2006, she was elected speaker. Then they lost control, gained it back in 2016, and of course she had to fight for that position again. A lot of the new progressives weren't sure they were going to support her, but she did manage to become reelected or elected again in 2016. Now, these women, who are these women? Secretaries of State in our federal government. Madeleine Albright, appointed by Clinton. Condoleezza Rice on the left, of course, put in place by Bush, and Hillary Clinton under Obama. Okay, but those are the three women who have been our Secretaries of State. Now, these women: Sandra Day O'Connor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and you've heard that name in our class. Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan. What do they have in common? The only women to have served on the Supreme Court. Okay, three of them still are currently there. Sandra Day O'Connor under Reagan, Clinton, of course, Ginsburg, and Obama, his two nominations, Sotomayor and Kagan. Okay, and the three, Ginsburg, Sotomayor, and Kagan, as we just said, are currently on the court. Okay. Largest ethnic minority in the U.S. Okay. The Hispanics or Latinos, countries of origin: Mexico, Puerto Rico, El Salvador, and Cuba. Main problems in this group as far as achieving economic and political power. Low income levels, language naturally. Language is the biggest problem for any group. A lack of job training as they come. Facing, immigration has been an issue for several decades. Sometimes it feels like we've just started discussing it, but it goes back again several decades. Who do they identify with? Well, the Democratic Party, Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans definitely tend to go that direction. Cubans, the Republican Party. So they don't necessarily identify with one or the other, but the Mexican Americans make up the largest percentage of Hispanics, and they identify with the Democratic Party. Asians, okay. Current facts about the Asian American population. Considered the model minority, according to your text, most highly skilled immigrant group. Right now, the question is, are we discriminating against them in college admissions? Several cases in front of the Supreme Court discussing that, because, of course, with affirmative action, meaning to create a more diverse society, they, of course, are in one of the ethnic minorities, and do they qualify? And what we're discussing right now is whether or not they're actually being discriminated against when looking at diversity. They have replaced Hispanics as the group with the greatest number of yearly immigrants. So we see that. We discuss when we try to predict the future as far as any parts of our population. Right now we're looking at Asians as the group with the greatest number of yearly immigrants. Where that will go, we're not sure. Native Americans, American Indians, Native Americans, they've considered foreign nations under U.S. law. No civil rights until 1924, when the 14th Amendment was extended, or as we say, incorporated, to encompass Native Americans. Why is it difficult for them to obtain power? It becomes the question, especially since we consider them foreign nations. They're, very scattered, not as united as you might think they would be, which makes them become politically fragmented. Okay, and you can see here's kind of a breakdown of the 25 largest groups, and you can see when it gets down to it, a lot of the groups just don't have great size, which means vote. Okay, so that definitely works against them in achieving more civil rights. Modern legislation for Native Americans. Native American languages are in our system by law unique. We have over time allowed gaming, casinos, and everything on the reservations. They've been allowed, even though in a lot of parts of our society we tend to not have a lot of gaming. Because they're foreign nations, they've been allowed to, conduct these and do their own thing as far as that's concerned. Affirmative action. What is affirmative action? All right. Special consideration of groups that have been discriminated against in the past. Okay, so let's jump back to the discussion on Asian Americans. Certainly, Asian Americans have been discriminated against in our history. In fact, in World War II, with the Japanese after the attack on Pearl Harbor, we had the internment camps. So we've had definitely some discrimination. In fact, you can go back to the early 1900s and find with separate but equal. The separate but equal schools didn't just apply to blacks and whites, but there were also the Japanese had special schools too. So it is how do we get past all of that with these different groups? Anyway, affirmative action, special consideration to groups that have been discriminated against in the past. The intent is, of course, to open the doors for jobs and college admissions. Opening college admissions, of course, hopefully, will open the door for jobs afterwards. Creates kind of a quota system, and this is where a lot of people have trouble with it, whether or not there's a specific number of jobs or placements given to select groups that based on race. And when you get into this, that is the term quota system. It comes up a lot, and people are very critical of that. Well, what does the Supreme Court say about that? We're going to get into some cases. But what do they say about affirmative action? Well, University of California versus Bakke. We're going to stop there for just a second. They have, in looking at race-based admissions, okay, what the Supreme Court has said is they'd like to support that, but using race as the sole factor can't be done because it is using race in discriminating. There's a term, reverse discrimination, which I'm sure you've heard of. So in discriminating in favor of somebody because of their race, you are discriminating against others because of their race, and that's the problem the Supreme Court has with that. Adirond Constructors. Federal, state, or local affirmative action program using racial classifications. Again, because it's race, it's subject to strict scrutiny, which you guys just did an assignment on. Discriminatory law or action narrowly tailored, okay, to remedy actual discrimination. So the Supreme Court, when they're hearing cases, and everything comes down to the courts, they're looking for actual discrimination in which they can tie then to racial classifications in making their decisions. So in this case, they were saying that the affirmative action program, they weren't really looking at the program, they were hoping to find actual discrimination. And if they find that, then any affirmative action program, and this is the key to this case, of course, that once it succeeds, and that's what critics of affirmative action often say, how do we know when we get there? The Supreme Court said, when we get there, then we have to change it or drop it. Okay, we were talking about that kind of with voting rights. When the increase in voter registration was achieved, the Supreme Court said, okay, then certain parts of the law are no longer constitutional. Same thing here. If affirmative action program succeeds in getting us to the point where in creating a diverse society, diverse job market, diverse college, administration, or admissions, then we change it. Once we get to that point, it gets changed or dropped. Now, interesting here, these two are University of Michigan cases, same day, exactly the same day, but they did kind of different things. In one case, they said that holding seats for minority groups violated equal protection. Equal protection, you're familiar with that phrase. So equal protection cannot be afforded everybody if you're holding seats for certain groups based on race. So they actually shot down the undergraduate admissions affirmative action program, but on the law school's admission policy, they did recognize diversity was a legitimate goal, and the law school had a limited affirmative action program. And so they affirmed that. They said, this is okay. So in one case, again, University of Michigan, and once they said no, improperly applied, and the other one, they said it was properly applied. So they saw both sides on that. Now, Supreme Court, what does the Supreme Court say as far as state voters and affirmative action? They have allowed state voters to go in and say, yeah, we're not going to be allowing this. We don't want this in our state. So here we have, in these, I believe in these states, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, these 8 states, probably almost 30% of the high school students in this country come from those states. And in these, the states have said, no, we're not going to do affirmative action programs at our public universities. Now, disabilities, I want you to go over this. I'm going to run out of time very shortly. Definitely you want to go through these new slides if you downloaded it before. You're going to want to go over it. If we have time later, we may do 5 minutes on disabilities. But you're going to get to, I've added several slides that I want you to get to. Hopefully we can get to these in a separate one. But this is a good one, more recently. You want to get through and touch on these. Anyway, we got only a few seconds left. I'm going to end it, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.